so get this. We're diving into a case that has everyone in the UK, like, totally freaking out.
It's the Lucy Letby case, right?
Yeah, Lucy Letby. And you guys, our listeners, have been blowing up our inbox about this, sending us articles, expert opinions, like the whole shebang. So we know you want to get to the bottom of this. What's become like a total medical mystery, but also kind of feels like a legal nightmare?
Yeah, no, you're right. This isn't just another headline. We're talking about a neonatal nurse.
Yeah.
A baby nurse who's been found guilty of murdering 7 infants.
7.
And then attempting to murder 6 more.
It's crazy. And the details that came out during the trial, ugh, chilling.
Oh, look.
Which makes the article we're looking at today from Yahoo News even more like, whoa. Because just when you thought everything was settled, this group of, like, medical bigwigs pops up and they're all, hold on, something's not right here.
And it's not just any group. We're talking internationally renowned pediatric specialists.
Like the best of the best.
Led by Dr. Shu Li. And they didn't just, glance at the case. They did a deep dive into all the medical records. And their conclusion, well, let's just say it throws the whole case into question.
Big time. Okay, so for those who haven't been following every twist and turn of this case like we have, let's do a super quick recap. Letby was convicted because the prosecution said there was this whole pattern of her hurting these babies on purpose.
Right, like injecting air into their bloodstream.
Insulin poisoning. I mean, the accusations were just horrifying.
And because of that, she was given 15 whole life terms.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's basically a life sentence without any chance of getting out. It's super rare in the UK. They only give that out for the absolute worst crimes. So you've got this case that seemed like airtight. Guilty verdicts, the whole 9 yards. And then, boom, this expert panel comes in and drops this bombshell. They're saying there's no medical evidence to back up the claims that Letby did this on purpose. Instead, they're pointing to bad medical care and natural causes as the more likely explanations for what happened to these babies.
And the thing is, they aren't just saying, mistakes were made. They're going through specific cases one by one and giving these really specific alternate explanations, and it all lines up with their expertise.
Like, for example, there's child 1, a twin boy. The prosecution said Letby murdered him by injecting air.
Right.
But the panel is suggesting that he actually died from a blood clot in his lung, a pulmonary embolism.
And they think this clot came from a delayed infusion of intravenous lipids.
Which is basically like a nutritional supplement they give to premature babies, right? It's pretty common.
Yeah, exactly.
So wait, a delayed lipid infusion can cause a pulmonary embolism in a baby. How does that even...
It's complicated, but basically, premature babies, their circulatory systems are still, developing, and they can be really fragile. So if there's a delay in getting those lipids, it can mess up their blood chemistry, and that can make them more likely to get clots, especially in those tiny blood vessels in their lungs.
See, this is why I love these deep dives. You learn about these details, and it makes you rethink everything. It makes you wonder, did they miss this in the original trial?
Yeah, and that's a big part of what this panel is suggesting. Maybe the focus on Letby deliberately harming these babies kind of blinded everyone to other explanations that, might actually be more likely.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this delayed infusion theory for child 1. What other examples are they using to back up their claim that it was bad medical care?
Well, there's the case of this 10-week-old baby girl.
Okay.
Letby was convicted of murdering her on her 4th attempt. She allegedly tried to kill this baby 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
But in this case, the panel is saying she died from complications from respiratory distress syndrome and chronic lung disease, which sadly are pretty common in premature infants.
Right.
Their point is that these conditions, while serious, could have been managed better with the right care.
So they're saying maybe with better care, this baby could have survived.
That's what they're suggesting. And again, keep in mind, these are super specialized doctors who have dedicated their lives to understanding how to care for newborn babies. They're looking at these cases through a very specific lens, one that maybe wasn't fully used during the original trial.
It really does make you wonder if maybe the assumption that there was foul play, that someone was doing this on purpose, maybe that skewed how everyone looked at the medical evidence.
That's definitely one of the things we're going to have to unpack. Was this, tunnel vision? Did the prosecution latch onto a story and then, force the evidence to fit? Or is there something else going on here?
Okay, so we've got these alternative explanations for 2 specific cases. But the prosecution's case wasn't just based on those 2, right?
No, definitely not. They said Letby hurt multiple infants.
Right.
And there's one piece of the original case that was especially damning. The insulin.
The insulin.
The prosecution said Letby deliberately poisoned 2 of the babies with insulin,
Right.
and that was seen as like the smoking gun. It seemed to show without a doubt that she was intentionally hurting these babies.
Yeah, because it's not like babies just randomly have high levels of insulin, right?
That's what the prosecution argued. And what's interesting is that during the trial, Letby's original lawyers didn't even try to fight the insulin findings.
Really? So everyone at the time was basically like, yeah, okay, insulin poisoning happened.
Pretty much. But now, this new expert panel is saying, hold on, not so fast. They're questioning whether you can really use insulin C-peptide levels as definite proof that someone was injected with insulin on purpose.
C-peptide.
Right.
Okay, you've lost me a little. What's C-peptide and why is it important here?
So it's a bit technical, but I'll try to keep it simple. Basically, when your body makes insulin naturally, it also makes this other thing called C-peptide. They kind of go together.
Yeah.
So if you inject someone with insulin, like from a bottle, you wouldn't expect to see their C-peptide levels go up too.
Okay.
But if their body is making too much insulin on its own for whatever reason, then you would see C-peptide along with it.
Oh, okay, I see. So is the panel saying that maybe the babies weren't injected, that maybe their bodies were just making too much insulin for some other reason?
Yeah, they're not saying for sure that there were no injections, but their point is that just finding insulin without looking at the C-peptide levels and other things that could cause high insulin in babies, that's not enough to say for sure that someone was trying to hurt them.
And that is a huge deal, right? If the insulin evidence isn't as strong as everyone thought, then it kind of changes the whole case.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. It's not about picking sides or jumping to conclusions. It's about digging into the details, looking at all the angles, and trying to figure out what really happened in this incredibly complex and potentially tragic situation.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling we're just getting started.
Yeah, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. What's underneath could be even more revealing and maybe even more disturbing.
All right. Well, I'm hooked. Let's keep digging.
It's amazing how this expert panel is building their argument. Like, they're not just throwing out random ideas. They're going through these medical records so carefully and then using their, decades of experience in neonatal care to present these other possibilities.
Yeah, that's what's so wild to me. It's not like some, internet conspiracy theory. We're talking about doctors who, literally wrote the book on neonatal medicine.
Right. And the Yahoo article gets into some more of their findings that really drive that point home.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they point out how a lot of these infants, they were already in really, really tough shape.
They were in the NICU for a reason.
Exactly. They were premature, they had underlying health problems, they were vulnerable.
So are they saying that maybe their decline wasn't because of something malicious? Maybe it was just, complications that happen sometimes, especially in, such a high-risk environment.
Exactly. And this is where their expertise really shines. They've spent their whole careers dealing with these tiny babies, figuring out how to care for them, understanding all the things that can go wrong, even when you're giving them the best possible care.
It's like they're looking at the same puzzle pieces as the prosecution, but putting them together in a totally different way and getting a completely different picture.
Such a good way to put it. And it highlights something really important. Medical evidence, it seems objective, but it can actually be interpreted in so many ways, especially when you have experts with different backgrounds and experiences.
Okay, let's get back to the specific cases for a sec. We talked about child 1 and the delayed lipid infusion thing.
Yeah.
What about the 10-week-old girl? The one the panel said might have been saved if she'd gotten better care. What exactly are they questioning about her treatment?
So in her case, she was diagnosed with respiratory distress syndrome. It's this condition that makes it hard for the lungs to work properly.
Right.
It's often seen in preemies because their lungs haven't fully developed yet.
Yeah.
The panel is saying that her care, specifically how they managed her breathing, might not have been the best, and that could have made her worse.
Okay, but respiratory distress, that's got to be pretty common in an NICU, right? Why are they focusing on this one? What makes them think there were problems with her care?
Well, remember, this panel isn't just like any pediatricians. They're specialists. Like Dr. Lee, he's published tons of research on neonatal respiratory distress. He's like one of the top experts in the world.
So it's not just like he's saying they messed up. He's using his deep knowledge of this condition to really analyze how she was treated.
Exactly. And looking at the records, he thinks there were mischances, delays in doing things, maybe even some misunderstandings about her symptoms. And all of that could have contributed to, to what happened.
Wow. This is getting so intense. It's like we're watching one of those medical detective shows.
I know.
And what's even crazier is that these experts are basically giving us a second opinion, you know?
Yeah.
They're making us think twice about everything we've been told.
Totally. They're encouraging us to question what we think we know, to look beyond the initial story and consider that, maybe things aren't as straightforward as they seemed at first.
Right. And that brings us back to the insulin. I mean, the fact that Letby's lawyers in the original trial didn't even challenge that evidence, it makes it seem pretty solid.
Right.
So why is this panel so skeptical? What are they seeing that everyone else missed?
Okay, so they're arguing that high insulin levels, sure, they can be a sign of poisoning, but it's not always that simple, especially in babies who already have, these complicated medical conditions.
Okay, I get that there are nuances, but still, babies in the NICU just don't randomly end up with super high insulin, do they?
That's where the C-peptide comes in again. Remember, it's produced naturally by the body along with insulin.
Yeah.
So if someone is injected with insulin, you wouldn't necessarily see their C-peptide levels go up too. But if the body's making extra insulin for some other reason, then you would see C-peptide too.
So the panel is basically saying you can't just look at the insulin by itself. You have to look at the whole picture.
Right. And they think the prosecution focused so much on the insulin without really considering those C-peptide levels and other things that could cause high insulin in babies. Maybe that's why they interpreted the evidence the way they did.
Interesting. So they're not totally ruling out injections, but they're saying it's not as clear-cut as it seemed.
Exactly. They're saying other things could have caused those high insulin levels, like the baby's other health problems, the meds they were getting, even metabolic stuff.
Okay, I'm starting to see how their argument is coming together. They're like going through each piece of evidence that led to Letby's conviction and giving us these other possible explanations.
And what's really convincing is that all of their explanations line up with their specific areas of expertise. They're not just some random doctors giving their opinion. They're bringing like a super deep understanding of how babies' bodies work, how drugs work, and how to care for these really sick babies.
This is seriously making me rethink everything I thought I knew about this case. It just shows how important it is to have different expert opinions in these kinds of complex medical situations.
I totally agree. Having all those different perspectives can help prevent tunnel vision and make sure everyone is considering all the possibilities.
Okay, so I know you don't want to jump to conclusions or anything, but I got to ask, what if this panel is right?
Yeah.
What if Letby didn't actually hurt these babies on purpose? I mean, what are the implications of that?
Oh, the implications are huge. On so many levels.
Yeah.
First of all, it means a woman might be in prison for life for something she didn't do.
Which is terrifying. And not just for her, for anyone. It makes you wonder how many other cases are out there like this, where maybe, someone missed something important or they interpreted something wrong.
It's a scary thought. And then, even beyond that, this case raises some serious questions about the healthcare system itself.
You're talking about the hospital where Letby worked.
Yeah, the Countess of Chester Hospital. The article kind of hints that there might be some problems there.
Like what?
Well, there are concerns about how many nurses and doctors they had.
Okay, so maybe they were short-staffed. That's a pretty common problem these days, though, right?
Yeah, true. But it might be more than that. The panel's report also says there might have been communication problems among the staff. Like, maybe people were hesitant to speak up if they saw something wrong.
Oh, like a culture of silence.
Exactly. Like, what if people were afraid to say something? And if that's the case, it creates this environment where mistakes can happen and no one does anything about it. And that can lead to, really bad outcomes.
This is starting to feel like it's not just about Letby anymore. It's about how things can go so wrong, even in places that are supposed to be about helping people and saving lives.
It definitely reminds us that we can't just assume patients are safe. We need to have good systems in place to prevent harm. Systems that are transparent, that encourage people to speak up and make sure that when mistakes happen, they're addressed quickly.
Absolutely. Makes you think maybe everyone was so focused on finding someone to blame that they didn't look closely enough at the bigger problems that might have contributed to these deaths.
That's one of the most troubling parts of all of this.
It really makes you think. And this is just part of the story. I can't wait to see what else we find. Okay, so we've really gone deep on this Lucy Letby case, and I gotta say, I'm more confused now than when we started. Yeah. At first, it seemed so, like, open and shut. You had a nurse who seemed to be going rogue and hurting babies on purpose. But now, with all this stuff from the expert panel, it's like the whole case is falling apart.
It definitely makes you question everything, right? It makes you think about, like, how medical science works, how the legal system works, the whole thing.
And the thing is, even if Letby is innocent, those babies are still gone. Their families are dealing with this horrible grief. And now they have to face the fact that maybe the justice system got it wrong.
Absolutely. The impact on these families is just devastating. And it reminds us that while we're here, looking at evidence and debating procedures, there are real people whose lives have been completely shattered by this.
It's so sad. And I think that's part of what makes this case so captivating, right? It's not just some intellectual exercise. It's about human mistakes. It's about how much we don't know. And it's about trying to find the truth, even when it's surrounded by so much tragedy.
That's a great way to put it. And I think it's when we're faced with that uncertainty, when we don't have easy answers, that's when we're forced to really think critically, to question what we believe and be open to the idea that maybe we were wrong.
Yeah. Remember at the beginning of this deep dive, we wanted to figure out how these experts could reach such a different conclusion than the jury did in the original trial. So, after looking at all this, what do you think is the biggest takeaway?
I think it comes down to perspective. The prosecution, they presented a story that seemed to fit the evidence they had. But this expert panel, with all their specialized knowledge and their years of working with babies, they've shown us a whole new side of things. They've proven that the same evidence can be interpreted in different ways, and that the simplest explanation isn't always the right one.
It's like that saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Everyone heard hoofbeats and thought horse, but this panel is saying, hold on, maybe it's a zebra after all.
Perfect analogy. And it shows how easy it is to get tunnel vision. That initial idea that Letby was doing this on purpose, maybe that stopped people from seeing other possibilities.
What's really scary is, if this panel is right, then the system messed up in a big way. Not only was someone innocent possibly convicted, but the real problems that might have led to these babies' deaths, maybe those were completely missed.
Yeah, that's the real tragedy here. It was a missed chance to learn from what happened and to make the system better, to make it safer for patients.
It's like a wake-up call, isn't it? Healthcare, even with all the advances we've made, it's still run by humans. And humans make mistakes, and we don't know everything.
Exactly. And we need to remember that. We need to be careful, we need to talk to each other, and we need to be willing to question what we think we know, even when it seems obvious.
This whole case has been such a whirlwind. First, there was shock and horror when the accusations came out. Then, as we learned more about what the experts were saying, there was confusion and doubt. I'm sure our listeners are feeling it too.
This is definitely a case that sticks with you, that makes you rethink everything.
Before we go, I want to encourage everyone listening to check out the full article from Yahoo News and all the other resources we've linked in the show notes. Don't just take our word for it. Go explore the evidence, the arguments, all the different sides of this.
It's so important to think critically, especially when you're dealing with information that can have such a big impact.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. But of course, the conversation doesn't stop here. Keep those questions coming, keep thinking about this, and let's keep exploring all the angles of this case together.